Welcome back. As you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy here for the Daily Blob, and it appears that China is looking at the stupid games that the United States is trying to play and saying, well, if you can play stupid games, we can too. So I've been talking about in a number of these videos the asinine policies the United States has towards China right now. Again, we have to punish China for providing us low quality products in an efficient manner. How dare you provide our society the goods that our citizens want to buy? You need to be punished. Anyways, one of the things with that is basically trying to keep the Chinese folks from progressing in the artificial intelligence world. So under the Biden administration, we have these AI diffusion rules. And basically the idea is that our companies cannot sell GPUs or AI processors to China, right? China man has gone as far in their society as we feel comfortable with. Ergo, China man has to stop their progression. Anyways, Trump came in. He's getting rid of the diffusion rules. He's changing out some of the rules. Basically, they're still not going to be able to get GPUs, but it's a whole other disaster. But one of the things that Trump has added to our policy decision is basically the idea that since we may have, out of the corner of our eye, seen some product that's used in the Huawei AI chips, we have the right to enforce export controls. And basically what this means is Trump is saying is that any country who buys Huawei processors, these AI processors, will see punishment for us for violating our export control laws, which yeah, it's a hell of a thing. And literally, if you look at the reasoning, basically it stated, we do not believe they could have created these processors without some of our products somehow. Ergo, we get to control whether or not those products are sold around the world, which is a hell of a thing. Anyways, so China has come back and said, oh, you want to play stupid games? Buckos, we can play stupid games too. So Beijing draws clear legal line as U.S. seeks to globally restrict use of Chinese chips. Basically, they're going to use their own anti-sanctions law to go after countries that are enforcing export control laws. And so this stuff is just going to get so stupid. So, as Washington seeks to globally restrict the use of Chinese advanced computing chips, Beijing is drawing a clear legal line by saying that any entity that enforces or enables the United States restrictions could be in violation of China's anti-foreign sanctions law. So basically, they put an anti-foreign sanctions law on the books, I do believe it was 2021, to essentially say any country out there that is trying to sanction China is now going to be in violation of their anti-sanctions law. And so with that, there's this whole thing about whether or not you can invest in China, whether or not you can travel through China. There's a whole bunch of restrictions and that kind of stuff there. But basically what China is doing is they're saying, you know, if the United States believes that they can pass laws that affect the entire globe in order to bring detriment to the Chinese people, then it behooves China to come up with laws to say, no, you can't. China condemned on Wednesday new U.S. warnings on the use of artificial intelligence chips by Chinese tech giant Huawei, vowing it would take steps against such, quote, typical unilateral bullying and protectionism by the U.S. to restrict other countries' access to advanced computing chips and AI, according to a statement by the Ministry of Commerce. Quote, the U.S. should immediately rectify its erroneous practices, comply with international economic and trade rules, and respect other nations' rights to technological development, said a spokesperson for the ministry. The spokesperson stressed that, quote, any organization or individual that enforces or assists in enforcing such measures will risk violating Chinese laws and regulations. Hey, if the United States can create stupid laws and regulations, China man can too, right? Including the anti-foreign sanctions law, and shall bear corresponding legal liabilities. Washington unveiled fresh guidelines last Wednesday, warning companies that the use of Chinese-made advanced AI semiconductors, specifically tech giant Huawei's Ascend chips, would put them at risk of violating U.S. export controls. And so I'm very concerned about this as an American. Right? You know, as a veteran, whose father is a veteran, whose grandfather is a veteran, whose great-grandfather is a veteran, again, I do not know what rights I have earned for myself in this country, but I do believe if I have one right, it's to scream about these stupid, asinine policies of our government who is so invested in this idea of manifest destiny. And as I've talked about many times before, right, it's bad to be racist, but it's worse to be an incompetent racist. And my issue with the policies that the US government is pushing through is not simply that they are horrible and racist in the whole nine yards, but they're actually going to end up biting us in the ass, right? So with the Bush administration and the Obama administration, the Biden and the Trump administration, the Biden administration, the Trump administration again, basically what we've been seeing again is this idea of manifest destiny. We should control the world. We are the superior people, ergo everybody else must listen to us. And so we've seen this with them trying to control how the dollar is used, right? The currency, a currency used by many other countries around the world. Basically, we're saying since we created the dollar, we can state what the dollar can be spent on in completely other countries, which again, I think is a bad policy. We have the SWIFT financial transaction system. Basically, when governments and large organizations need to transfer money, there's a SWIFT system. And basically we said, the government has said, if you're doing something we don't like, you can't use the SWIFT system. Now with the export controls, the idea is if we out of the corner of our eye saw something that you might have used in order to build a particular product, we have the right to control how that product is sold globally, right? And the big issue that I have with these policies is these are very powerful tools, right? These are linchpins to the modern global order. And so if you wield those tools as weapons, it is a very strong weapon initially, but if you use it too much, everybody else is just going to stop using your particular product. Again, it's like with the BRICS currency, right? There's this BRICS currency that's supposed to come out. Fucking joke. But, right? Here's the thing. If your country can't use the US dollar for transactions, all of a sudden a joke starts to look like a hell of a lot better. Again, when you have India, and India wants to buy oil from Russia. Again, India doesn't really give a crap about Ukraine. Ukraine has 40 million people. India has like 1.2 billion people. The reality is India has bigger crap to deal with. They want to get their hands on oil, right? So the rest of the world wants to sanction Russia. India's like, yeah, whatever. Sounds like a discount to us. We will take bargain basement oil. If you can't use the SWIFT system now because you're trying to buy stuff from Russia, they'll come up with their own system. Again, there's that thing that I talked about before with the old white man, where he said, Eli, I'm not telling you we have a good system, but it's the system we have. And there's an inertia with that. You can have a really bad system that you dislike, but if that system functions at least well enough, you're gonna keep using that system because it's what you used yesterday, and you'll use it tomorrow because it's what you used today. The issue you run into is if for some reason people force you to stop using that bad system, you're gonna come up with a different system. So here's the thing, right? If we use the dollar as a weapon, people and countries are going to find a different currency to use other than the dollar. If we use the SWIFT transaction system as a weapon, they're going to figure out how to clear money in ways other than the SWIFT transaction system. Again, if we use export controls as a weapon, they are going to figure out ways around it, or they're going to start ignoring that particular thing. And that's where I get very concerned with the policies that our administrations are putting into place is one, I think they're wrong-headed from the get-go, but two, they're actually destroying the leverage we have. And so now what we see with the anti-foreign sanctions law from China, right? China is factory of the world, right? The reality is their economy is going to get bigger than the United States at some point within the next decade or two. And the fact of the matter is they already have 4x the population that the United States does. And the reality is our current administration is completely and utterly destroying our place within the global order. Again, when you look at it from a European European standpoint or from other country standpoints. You know, the United States right now is literally talking about putting boots on the ground in Greenland. The Trump administration thinks that they have the right to slaughter Europeans so that they can get access to Greenland. And that's what we're talking about, right? When Trump talks about using military force to take over Greenland, that's talking about killing Europeans in order to take that plot of land. At the exact same time, he wants to walk away from NATO and the whole 9 yards. And so one of the interesting things is when you look at the power dynamic, right? You know, with allies and enemies and all that kind of stuff, a lot of times it's based off of whatever the current situation is, right? So basically, with Europe and a lot of other countries, they look at what our current policies are, and then you look at China. And again, are you that scared of China? Again, not that the Taiwanese shouldn't be scared of China, or maybe the Indians or the Nepalese or the Koreans. But if you're in France, it's kind of like India doesn't really care that much about Ukraine. Fair enough. Does France really care that much about Taiwan? They do care about Greenland. They don't necessarily care about Taiwan. And so one of the issues that we have is the rupturing of this global order is it now changes the calculus different countries and different people are going to be using to decide basically, you know, who they're going to side with and where they're going to move their particular future. And so this becomes interesting, right? So you got the U.S. law, right? You got the U.S. export control law, where if your country buys these Ascend processors from Huawei, you're going to get punished, and so you got to worry about that. But then you have the Chinese laws that say if you don't buy the Huawei AI chips, you're going to get punished. One of the things that countries, and again, the people have to think about is where do they think the future is at? Right? Again, you know, China has already taken over so much of the industrial capacity for the world. They're the leading manufacturer of solar panels. They're the leading manufacturer of electric cars. They're a leading manufacturer of so much of the technology. Again, they've got 4x the population of the United States, and they actually seem to be building a society versus continually building a war machine. Again, being here in the United States, dealing with the current medical healthcare system, right? Our healthcare system is a complete and utter disaster, but don't worry, we're going to spend $1 trillion on the military next year to keep us safe, right? You know, if you die from a preventable disease in the United States, that's what God intended, so long as we have, you know, a few dozen more F-35s. Anyways, right? So one of the things to be thinking about, again, from an international perspective, is who are you going to be more scared of within the next decade or two? Are you going to be more scared of the United States, or are you going to be more scared of China? If you're a country and you're going to be building up your technological capacity, who do you want to ally yourself with? Do you want to ally yourself with a country that's simply going to sell you the product? Do you want to buy 100,000 of these? Here, buy 100,000 of these. Or do you want to side with a country that literally is stating, well, if you do something that we slightly dislike, we feel that we have the right to punish you and literally hold your society back? These are things that these are decision points that a lot of people are going to have to be making in the future. And so that's why I get concerned. Again, the folks here in the United States, they feel like, well, we are going to create a policy and then everybody else has to abide by it. And again, we're 330 million people in a world of 8 billion people, right? Those other, 7.8 billion people on the planet might have a different idea of where they want their future to be. And if we keep using these just ham-fisted, racist, manifest destiny era policies, I really think it's going to drive us into the past. We are only as strong as our place within the global order. If the global order shuts us out, it's gonna be a major issue for us going forward, and so that's where I get concerned with this. Again, I've talked about this with the sanctioning of products being sold to China and then them building their own. Again, we sanction Huawei from being able to buy processors; they build their own processors. We sanction them from being able to use an operating system; they create their own operating system. We sanction them from being able to use Windows; they turn their operating system into a desktop operating system. We sanction them from using the AI processors. And even now, right, it's stated that their processors are basically as good as NVIDIA. They just use a lot more electricity. Which, I mean, okay, their electricity bills are a little higher than ours, but that's not exactly the defensive moat that makes me feel most comfortable. And so that's one of the curious things that we see with this is that we have this policy to try to kneecap their society. One, it's not actually kneecapping their society for really any length of time. It's forcing them to start producing their own products or services to directly compete. So NVIDIA, Microsoft, the rest of these companies can't sell into China, so they're not making the money anymore. China spins up their industry, so they actually create a competitive market, and then all of a sudden, again, there is that real question of what does NVIDIA look like in another decade? You know, I talk about this with BlackBerry, I talk about this with AOL and MySpace and Kodak. So many of these companies, Yahoo. At the time when they were at their height, it seemed like they would be at their height forever. And now they're being sold for tax purposes. Again, you look at NVIDIA in 2025, and it may seem impossible that they would ever fail. But if our government policies are so god awful, they force China to be a real competitor in the market, and all of a sudden the rest of the world decides, hey, we like their products better. How fast can NVIDIA go from being a $3 trillion company back down to being bankrupt? I would argue it could be a hell of a lot faster than we're expecting. And so these are the things that I get concerned about. And what we're starting to see more and more now is previously China tried to acquiesce. Oh, I'm so sorry, right? You know, we say they did something bad and they kind of apologize. Again, they're getting to the point, they're getting tired of apologizing. Not only are they getting tired of apologizing, they literally do not need to apologize. And the problem that we're going to run into is at some point, they are going to be bigger than us, and instead of simply not apologizing, if they start flipping the global order, it's going to be incredibly painful. So what is the takeaway for this particular video? I think the takeaway for this particular video is a piece of advice I've been giving for many years now, in that you might want to think about going and getting your Juris Doctor, going and getting your law degree. Now, I say this to a lot of my students and they become horrified, right? Wait a minute, I thought technology was about latency and bit rates and all that kind of stuff. One of the things that I would argue in the modern world is that technology has more to do with the legal world at this point than it does have about bits and bytes. Again, with a lot of this technology, a lot of it has plateaued. And what becomes interesting now is seeing how the laws are created and modeled around our technology environment, and then how the technology then has to fit within the new legal framework. One of the reasons that technology has been able to take off for the past, few decades is simply that there hasn't been good regulation around the technology. Again, when you look at things like Bitcoin, is Bitcoin actually a good product? Or is Bitcoin simply not having the same amounts of regulation that the banks have to deal with, ergo it's an easier product to use, right? Cash is very easy to use, but then you get banks, and then you got this whole legal framework that the banks have to deal with, and know your customer, and this and that and the other thing. And all of a sudden, a currency, which was pretty easy, becomes very difficult. That's not actually the banks, that's the legal frameworks the banks have to work within, right? Again, with Bitcoin or any of these cryptocurrencies, right? People are like, oh, this is so much better than the old way. Is it better than the old way, or is it simply not regulated yet? And as soon as the regulations come down, is it actually going to be a much worse system? And I think what's interesting to look at, again, whether you're looking at national laws about how products and services are used and sold and developed, if you're looking at the international order, I think what becomes very interesting is this idea of how does technology fit within the legal framework of the modern world, how the legal framework of the modern world is going to be modified over the next couple of decades, and then where does that lead the technology industry? industry. Again, you have the export controls in the United States, you have the anti-sanction laws coming out of China, Europe has their laws, Canada has their law, all these different countries have their laws. Again, individual states have their laws. One of the big issues we have right now in the United States is things like biometrics and certain things. Individual states are coming up with their own laws about technology. And so one of the things that used to be valuable about the United States is you came to the United States and you were dealing with the same set of laws. Like whether you sold a product in Maryland or whether you sold a product in California, it was basically the same set of laws. The reason that Facebook was able to take off, the reason Twitter was able to take off, they came into this market and then they were able to expand through the market, and basically everybody had the same laws. Well, now Illinois has biometric laws that are different than Texas's biometric laws. Texas, again, has anti-porn laws that are different than Oregon's anti-porn laws, right? All these different states are literally coming up with their own laws about how technology can be used. And what becomes interesting, again, is a startup that was spun up in 2005 was in a different legal environment than the one that was spun up in 2015, which is going to be different than the startup that is spun up in a legal environment of 2035. And so I think the people that understand both the technology side and the legal side are the ones that are going to be truly valuable, again, for the next decade or so. So anyways, that's my thought on what the takeaway from this should be. It will be curious to see just how far this idiocy goes and then what the actual ramifications are. Again, Trump can threaten export controls, but if they don't actually enforce those export controls, does it really matter? Again, China can have these anti-sanction laws, but if they don't enforce the anti-sanction laws, again, does it really matter? What happens when countries... they're screwed no matter what they do? I don't know. It'll be interesting, at least, to see what happens. Anyways, that's all I gotta say. See y'all later.